In the bitter winter of 1845, two identical girls walked through the doors of the Vermont Medical Institute in Burlington, their pale hands trembling not from the cold, but from a condition that would soon consume them both. Within 4 months, Emma and Anna Whitmore would be dead. One discovered clawing at the wooden walls of her cell until her fingertips bled, screaming about shadows that danced in daylight. The other found sitting perfectly still in a chair, her eyes wide open, staring at nothing while her body slowly withered away like a flower denied water. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dr. Jonathan Blackwood, the Institute's most respected physician, declared their deaths resulted from hereditary madness that ran in families like poison through bloodlines. But when other doctors attempted to examine the case records, they uncovered something that made their blood run cold. Every document had been deliberately altered, pages torn out with surgical precision, and entire sections rewritten in different handwriting. Dr. Blackwood himself disappeared from Burlington exactly 71 hours after the twins died, leaving behind only scattered notes written in a code that no scholar could decipher. What those cryptic writings revealed about human experimentation would force the medical community to choose between two terrible options: expose the truth and watch public trust in medicine crumble like autumn leaves, or bury the evidence so deep that future generations would never know what horrors had been committed in the name of scientific progress. They chose silence, but silence has a way of festering like an untreated wound, growing more infected with each passing year. The truth about Emma and Anna Whitmore has been rotting in the shadows of Vermont's medical history for 179 years, waiting for someone brave enough to dig up what powerful people intended to stay buried forever: the Whitmore farms sprawled across 200 acres of Vermont's most fertile valley land, where the Connecticut River curved through mountains like a silver ribbon threading through emerald fabric. The property commanded views of rolling hills that turned gold each autumn, their peaks often crowned with morning mist that locals claimed could predict the weather better than any almanac. In 1844, it was among the most prosperous dairy operations in the state, sustained by 43 Holstein cattle whose milk brought premium prices in Boston markets. But the wealth that built the Whitmore family's impressive white colonial house with its wraparound porch and hand-carved shutters came from more than just dairy farming. Samuel Whitmore had discovered that medical schools throughout New England desperately needed what he diplomatically called anatomical materials: fresh cadavers for dissection classes, preserved organs for study, and occasionally, when compensation was generous enough, living subjects for what physicians termed observational research. The business had begun innocently when farm workers died from accidents or illness. Instead of simple burial in the family cemetery, Samuel learned he could sell their bodies to the Vermont Medical Institute for $15 each, more money than most farmers earned in 3 months of hard labor. Soon Samuel wasn't waiting for natural deaths. Workers who became too familiar with family secrets, who asked uncomfortable questions about missing neighbors, or who simply outlived their usefulness would vanish during winter nights when snow covered tracks and muffled sounds. Emma and Anna Whitmore entered the world on a snow-heavy February night in 1829, during a blizzard that collapsed the barn roof and froze the well solid for 3 weeks. The identical twins grew up knowing they would inherit an empire built on moral compromise, disguised as legitimate business. By 1844, both girls were 15 years old, standing exactly 5 feet 4 inches tall with delicate builds that spoke of good nutrition and comfortable living. They shared identical auburn hair that caught sunlight like burnished copper, the same pale skin that freckled charmingly each summer, and the same piercing green eyes that seemed to see through pretense and lies with uncomfortable clarity. Eyes that servants whispered could read thoughts and predict actions before people knew their own intentions. Emma, born 12 minutes earlier while the storm raged at its fiercest, had always possessed an unsettling intensity that made adults uncomfortable. As children, she conducted elaborate experiments on small animals with scientific precision, documenting how different creatures responded to various stimuli and recording detailed observations about pain responses and survival instincts. She approached violence with the methodical patience other children reserved for needlework or music lessons. Anna, born as dawn finally broke through the storm clouds, demonstrated a disturbing calmness that most people found more frightening than her sister's obvious aggression. Where Emma would explode into calculated fury, Anna would simply observe with those green eyes until whoever had displeased her began shifting nervously and avoiding her gaze. She had learned early that silence could intimidate more effectively than shouting, that quiet threats delivered in conversational tones carried more weight than dramatic declarations. Both girls had been educated by private tutors, as befitted their social status, but their education extended far beyond conventional subjects. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Samuel, obsessed with what he called scientific advancement and empirical knowledge, encouraged his daughters to observe and participate in the family's clandestine activities from young ages. By 12, both girls had watched their father orchestrate the systematic elimination of problematic farm workers. By 14, they assisted in preparing bodies for sale to medical institutions. By 15, they had moved beyond observation to active participation in what Samuel proudly called the family enterprise. Burlington in 1845 was a city balancing between old-world traditions and ambitious scientific aspirations. The Vermont Medical Institute, established only 7 years earlier, was rapidly gaining recognition as one of the most progressive institutions in New England. Progressive meaning willing to push ethical boundaries that other medical schools avoided due to moral constraints or legal concerns. The institute occupied an impressive brick building on Church Street, its neoclassical architecture designed to convey dignity and scholarly respectability. Tall windows and elegant columns suggested that important, legitimate work was conducted within, work that sometimes required discretion and confidentiality to protect both patients and advancing medical knowledge. Dr. Jonathan Blackwood had arrived in Burlington during spring of 1844, carrying credentials from Harvard Medical School and bringing theories about human behavior that he claimed would revolutionize psychiatric treatment. Blackwood stood 6 feet tall with prematurely silver hair and intense gray eyes that cataloged every detail they observed. His hands moved with surgical precision, long fingers that handled delicate instruments with the confidence of someone accustomed to complex, demanding work. Blackwood's theories centered on his belief that mental illness, criminal tendencies, and personality disorders were biological conditions that could be measured, manipulated, and potentially cured through careful application of chemical compounds combined with systematic behavioral modification. He had published papers in obscure medical journals suggesting that human consciousness operated like a complex mechanical device that could be adjusted, repaired, and improved through proper scientific intervention. Most controversially, Blackwood believed that identical twins offered unprecedented opportunities to test his theories under perfectly controlled conditions. Since twins shared identical physical characteristics and family backgrounds, any differences in their responses to experimental treatments could be attributed solely to the interventions themselves rather than individual variations in biology or upbringing. One twin could serve as a control subject while the other received experimental treatment, providing clear evidence of therapeutic effectiveness or failure. These radical theories had made Blackwood persona non grata in Boston medical circles, where colleagues viewed his ideas as dangerously unethical and potentially criminal. But Burlington's younger medical establishment proved more receptive to controversial ideas. The Vermont Medical Institute offered him a position as professor of mental medicine, providing laboratory space and research funding that Harvard had denied him. What institute administrators didn't realize was that Blackwood had been quietly forced to leave Boston after allegations surfaced regarding unauthorized experiments on patients at McLean Hospital. While nothing was proven in court, persistent rumors suggested that several patient deaths could be directly attributed to Blackwood's experimental treatments. The Boston medical community had diplomatically encouraged his departure, preferring to avoid scandals that might damage medical education's reputation throughout Massachusetts. The first indication that something was seriously wrong at the Whitmore farm came on a frozen March morning when Emma appeared at the kitchen door completely naked despite temperatures well below freezing. Her pale skin showed blue and purple, mottling from exposure to cold. Fresh blood covered her hands and arms, though examination revealed none of it was her own. In her right hand, Emma gripped a butcher knife, its blade crusted with what appeared to be tissue fragments and bone chips. Deep scratches covered her face and torso, as if she had fought her way through thorny underbrush in complete darkness. Her normally sharp green eyes stared ahead with vacant expressions that suggested she wasn't entirely aware of her surroundings or circumstances. Samuel Whitmore, awakened by servant screams, found his daughter standing motionless in the doorway, swaying slightly as though she might collapse without warning. When questioned about her whereabouts and activities, Emma could only repeat one phrase in a flat, emotionless voice that chilled everyone who heard it. "The specimens are breathing. The specimens are breathing. The specimens are breathing." Anna, roused from sleep by the commotion, emerged from the house to discover her twin sister in this disturbing condition. For the first time in their lives, Anna appeared genuinely terrified by something Emma had done. The twins had shared countless secrets and collaborated in violence many times before, but Emma's current state suggested something beyond their usual calculated cruelty had occurred during the night hours. It required nearly 2 hours of systematic searching before Samuel located the source of the blood that stained Emma's hands and arms. In the dairy barn, a massive wooden structure approximately 300 yards from the main farmhouse, 4 farm workers lay dead in a scene that would haunt Samuel for his remaining years. The bodies had been arranged with methodical precision in a disturbing display that suggested ritual purpose rather than random violence or simple murder. Each corpse had been positioned as if seated around the large oak table where workers normally sorted and processed dairy equipment. Their hands were placed carefully on the table's surface, fingers arranged as though they were examining invisible documents or conducting some form of meeting that death had interrupted. Most disturbing, their eyes had been propped open using small wooden splinters inserted behind the eyelids, creating an illusion that the dead men remained alert and observant. The victims were Jacob Miller, a 35-year-old man who supervised the dairy operations; Daniel Foster, a younger worker known for his skill with difficult cattle; Matthew Green, a quiet man who maintained farm equipment; and elderly Thomas Wright, who had served the Whitmore family faithfully for over 20 years. All 4 had been killed by massive trauma to the skull, delivered with such tremendous force that bone fragments were embedded in the wooden walls surrounding them. Blood spatter patterns suggested the killings had been systematic rather than frenzied attacks. Each man had been struck multiple times while the others were forced to watch, waiting their turn to die in this macabre ceremony. The arrangement of bodies after death required considerable time and deliberate planning that made the murders even more chilling to contemplate. Candle remnants scattered around the table indicated the work had been completed by flickering candlelight, adding elements of ritual ceremony to what might otherwise have been straightforward killings motivated by rage or desperation. Someone had invested significant effort in positioning each corpse precisely, adjusting their posture repeatedly to achieve the desired theatrical effect. Emma retained no memory of the killings or the subsequent arrangement of the bodies into this grotesque tableau. When confronted with physical evidence, including the blood on her hands, the knife she had carried, and her obvious presence at the murder scene, she stared blankly and insisted she had been sleeping in her bed throughout the night. Her voice remained flat and emotionless, as though she were discussing routine farm chores rather than multiple homicides. Anna, despite her usual protective instincts toward her twin and their long history of covering for each other's violent behavior, found herself deeply disturbed by Emma's complete lack of emotional response to the accusations. Previously, when they had killed workers or participated in their father's grim business activities, Emma had always displayed some reaction, whether satisfaction, excitement, or even mild disgust. Now she seemed genuinely disconnected from reality, as if the person who had committed these brutal murders was someone else entirely. Samuel Whitmore, more concerned about protecting his family's reputation and business interests than seeking justice for 4 murdered workers, made a decision that would prove catastrophic for everyone involved. Rather than involving local authorities, who might ask uncomfortable questions about the farm's activities and discover the family's involvement in body trafficking, he decided to handle the situation privately. He told neighboring farmers that the 4 workers had abandoned their positions during the night, seeking better employment opportunities in larger cities like Boston or New York. This explanation was readily accepted since worker departures were common enough that few people investigated the details or questioned the timing. The bodies were hastily buried in unmarked graves on the remote eastern edge of the property, in a swampy section where the soil was too poor for farming and too isolated for casual discovery. Samuel burned the blood-stained clothing and invested considerable time cleaning the barn, though dark stains on the wooden walls would remain visible for months afterward, resisting all attempts at removal. To explain Emma's condition and injuries, the family claimed she had been hurt while attempting to prevent the workers' departure, sustaining her scratches and exposure during a courageous but unsuccessful pursuit through the dark woods surrounding the farm. Local residents accepted this story without question, viewing it as typical of the Whitmore family's dedication to their workers and their business. But the incident had clearly disturbed something fundamental in Emma's mind, and within days of the murders, she began experiencing what she described as visions of walking corpses. She would sit motionless for hours, staring at empty spaces while occasionally pointing at nothing visible and whispering about specimens that only she could perceive moving through the rooms. Sleep became impossible for Emma. She would pace the hallways of the farmhouse throughout the night, conducting whispered conversations with invisible companions and responding to voices that no one else could hear. During daylight hours, she would stand perfectly still in locations where the murdered workers had once performed their daily tasks, reaching out to touch objects that weren't there and nodding as though receiving instructions from unseen presences. Anna, meanwhile, found herself plagued by increasingly vivid nightmares that grew more disturbing each night. In her dreams, she witnessed the murders from multiple perspectives, sometimes experiencing them as Emma feeling the knife connect with flesh and bone, sometimes as one of the victims watching helplessly as death approached, and sometimes as an invisible observer taking detailed notes on the efficiency of different killing methods. These dreams were so realistic and detailed that Anna often woke convinced that blood covered her own hands. She would spend long minutes examining her fingers and palms in candlelight, searching for stains that her rational mind knew couldn't be there. More troubling still, Anna began experiencing increasing urges to replicate what Emma had accomplished in the barn. The desire started as simple curiosity about the technical aspects of the murders. How much force would be required to crush a human skull? Whether the victims had time to scream before death silenced them? What their final thoughts might have been as they watched their companions die and realized their own fate was approaching. But curiosity gradually evolved into compulsion, a growing need to experience the act of killing for herself, to understand what Emma had felt during those violent moments in the flickering candlelight. The twins, who had always shared an unusual psychological connection that allowed them to communicate through glances and predict each other's thoughts and actions, seemed to be feeding off each other's deteriorating mental state in ways that neither fully understood or could control. Anna began carrying a kitchen knife at all times, claiming she needed protection from the specimens that Emma insisted were lurking throughout the farm property. Emma spent hours staring at her hands, convinced they remained covered in blood that only she could see, washing them compulsively until the skin cracked and bled from constant scrubbing and harsh soap. As winter grudgingly surrendered to spring and the first tentative shoots of new grass began emerging from Vermont's thawing soil, the psychological condition of both Whitmore twins continued deteriorating in parallel patterns that seemed to follow some invisible choreography of madness. Their behaviors became increasingly erratic and unpredictable, causing servants to whisper among themselves about supernatural explanations for the girls' conditions. Emma's violent outbursts, which had once been rare and usually triggered by specific provocations, became more frequent and increasingly unpredictable. She would explode into rages over minor inconveniences that had never bothered her previously. A servant moving too slowly while serving breakfast. A cow that wouldn't cooperate quickly enough during milking. Even the sound of her father's voice reading morning newspapers aloud. During these episodes, Emma's physical strength seemed to increase dramatically, as if fury provided her with energy that normal physiology couldn't generate. It regularly required 5 grown men to restrain her when she attempted to attack a traveling minister who had come to the farm seeking donations for a new church in Burlington. The minister, an elderly Presbyterian named Reverend William Hayes, had made the mistake of suggesting that all human souls possessed equal value in God's eyes, regardless of social station or wealth. Emma responded by leaping across the parlor and attempting to strangle the man with her bare hands, screaming that some people existed solely as specimens for experimentation and that the Reverend was a fool for believing otherwise. The attack was so sudden and vicious that Samuel and 4 farm workers barely managed to separate Emma from her victim before she could complete what appeared to be a genuine murder attempt. Anna's condition evolved in the opposite direction, but with equal speed and intensity. Where her sister became increasingly explosive, Anna grew progressively more withdrawn, as if she was slowly disappearing from the physical world into some internal landscape that no one else could access or understand. She began speaking only in whispers when she spoke at all, and her conversations became increasingly disconnected from external reality. Servants reported discovering Anna in strange locations throughout the farm property, always standing completely motionless as if someone had placed her there and simply forgotten about her presence. They would find Anna at midnight standing in the middle of empty pastures, staring at stars with unblinking eyes that seemed to be searching for something among the constellations. Sometimes she would be discovered sitting in the abandoned workers' quarters where Jacob, Daniel, Matthew, and Thomas had once lived, positioned in the exact spots where their beds had been located. Most disturbingly, Anna was repeatedly found standing in the dairy barn, in the precise location where the murders had occurred, reaching out to touch invisible objects and carrying on whispered conversations with people who existed only in her increasingly fractured perception of reality. When questioned about these nocturnal wanderings, Anna would claim complete ignorance of leaving her room. She insisted that she went to sleep in her own bed each night and woke there each morning with no awareness of the hours spent wandering the farm grounds in various states of undress and confusion. The servants, already nervous about the march, murders and the strange behavior both twins had exhibited since then, began whispering among themselves about supernatural explanations for Anna's condition. Some suggested that the spirits of the murdered workers were calling to her, seeking justice or revenge for their deaths. Others believed that exposure to such violence had opened doorways in the girls' minds that allowed evil influences to enter and possess them. Samuel Whitmore, desperate to find rational explanations for his daughter's rapidly deteriorating mental states, began consulting with various physicians in Burlington and surrounding communities. Most dismissed their symptoms as temporary mental strain brought on by the isolation of farm life and the pressures of managing workers and livestock without proper supervision. They recommended travel, perhaps extended visits to relatives in more populated areas, or simply increased social interaction with people of their own class and educational background. Some suggested that the girls were suffering from hysteria, a condition that commonly affected young women of their age and social status, particularly those who had been exposed to shocking or violent events. But Dr. Jonathan Blackwood, when presented with detailed descriptions of the twins' conditions during a chance encounter at a Burlington Medical Society meeting, displayed immediate and intense interest that went far beyond professional curiosity or sympathy. Blackwood listened to Samuel's account with the focused attention of a scientist who had just discovered perfect laboratory specimens for his research. He asked probing questions about specific symptoms, the timeline of their development, and the relationship between the twins' conditions. He inquired about their family medical history, their education, their daily routines, and any medications or treatments they had received since the violent incident in March. What excited Blackwood most was the apparent symmetry between Emma and Anna's psychological deterioration. If one twin was becoming increasingly violent while the other grew more passive and withdrawn, they represented a naturally occurring experiment in behavioral extremes that could provide invaluable data about the biological basis of human personality and the mechanisms underlying mental illness. The fact that they were identical twins made them even more valuable from a research perspective, since any differences in their mental states could be attributed to psychological rather than physical factors. This eliminated variables that typically complicated medical research and made it difficult to draw clear conclusions about cause and effect relationships. Blackwood arranged to visit the Whitmore farm on a warm April afternoon, ostensibly to examine the twins and provide medical advice that might help restore them to their previous mental condition. The journey from Burlington required nearly 4 hours by carriage, along roads that became increasingly rough and poorly maintained as they moved away from the city toward more rural agricultural areas. The Whitmore property, when Blackwood first observed it through his carriage window, appeared idyllic and prosperous. The elegant farmhouse surrounded by carefully maintained grounds, the geometric precision of fenced pastures, and the neat arrangement of barns and outbuildings suggested successful farming operations and responsible land management. What Blackwood discovered when he actually examined the twins exceeded his most ambitious expectations for finding suitable research subjects. Here were two identical individuals displaying perfectly opposite psychological symptoms with no apparent external cause for their conditions and no family history of mental illness that might complicate the diagnostic picture. During his examination, which lasted nearly 7 hours, Blackwood took detailed notes about their physical responses, tested their reflexes with scientific precision, and asked increasingly probing questions about their mental states, their dreams, their fears, and their memories of recent events. More importantly, his trained medical eye noticed something that Samuel Whitmore had missed, despite months of daily observation. Both twins showed subtle but unmistakable signs of chronic exposure to mercury compounds and opium derivatives, substances that were sometimes used in medical treatments but could cause severe psychological disturbances when administered in improper dosages or dangerous combinations. Their pupils remained consistently dilated even in bright afternoon sunlight, suggesting ongoing exposure to opium or one of its pharmaceutical derivatives. Both exhibited slight tremors in their hands when they believed no one was observing them, particularly when asked to perform fine motor tasks like writing letters or sketching simple drawings. Most significantly, both twins complained of persistent metallic tastes in their mouths and occasional episodes of nausea that seemed unrelated to anything they had consumed. When Blackwood questioned them carefully about their daily routines, dietary habits, and any medications they might have been taking, he discovered that both twins had been consuming food and beverages from identical sources for several months, preceding their psychological deterioration. Their meals were prepared by the same cook using ingredients from the same storage areas. They drank water from the same well, and they had been taking identical doses of what Samuel described as tonic medicine designed to strengthen their constitution and improve their mental clarity during stressful periods. This discovery led Blackwood to a shocking realization that would reshape his entire approach to the case. Someone had been systematically poisoning both twins with carefully measured doses of various psychoactive substances, creating perfect conditions for his experimental theories while making the subjects believe their symptoms were naturally occurring mental illness. Whether this had been done deliberately as part of some existing experiment or accidentally through contaminated medicine hardly mattered from Blackwood's perspective. It presented an opportunity that the ambitious physician could not possibly resist. The twins were already partially prepared for the kind of behavioral modification research that Blackwood had been planning to conduct for years. Their minds had been rendered malleable by months of chemical influence. Their personalities were beginning to fracture along predictable lines, and their family was desperate enough to consider any treatment that might restore them to normalcy. All that remained was convincing Samuel Whitmore that the Vermont Medical Institute offered the best hope for his daughter's recovery. Dr. Blackwood made his formal proposal to Samuel Whitmore on a humid May evening as they sat in the farm's library while thunderstorms gathered over the mountains surrounding the valley. The room, lined with leather-bound books that Samuel had purchased to impress visitors rather than for actual reading, smelled of old paper and the pipe tobacco that perpetually clung to the heavy curtains covering the tall windows. Through those windows they could observe lightning flickering among the peaks, and the approaching thunder provided an ominous backdrop to their crucial conversation. The twins, Blackwood explained in his most professional and reassuring tone, were exhibiting symptoms that made them ideal candidates for a groundbreaking medical study that he had been developing for over 2 years. Their conditions, while certainly disturbing to witness and difficult for the family to manage, were actually quite fortunate from a scientific perspective because they provided an unprecedented opportunity to study the biological basis of human behavior under carefully controlled conditions. With proper treatment at the Vermont Medical Institute, using the most advanced therapeutic techniques available anywhere in American medicine, Blackwood believed he could not only cure their psychological disturbances, but also contribute invaluable knowledge to the rapidly expanding field of mental medicine. The twins would be helping to advance scientific understanding in ways that could benefit thousands of future patients suffering from similar conditions. Their participation in this research would ensure that their suffering served a greater purpose beyond personal recovery. The treatment protocol, Blackwood explained with the confidence of someone who had already planned every detail of the process, would involve careful administration of various therapeutic substances, combined with detailed observation and documentation of their responses to different interventions and behavioral modifications. Emma and Anna would be housed in comfortable private chambers specifically designed for long-term patient observation, provided with the best possible medical care available anywhere in New England, and monitored continuously by trained medical professionals who understood the complexities of mental illness and the delicate nature of experimental treatment. The study would last approximately 5 months, during which time the twins would be completely isolated from external stresses and distractions that might interfere with their recovery process. Family visits, correspondence, and contact with the outside world would be strictly regulated to prevent emotional disturbances that could complicate their healing. At the conclusion of this period, Blackwood promised they would be returned to their family, not only cured of their current symptoms, but actually improved beyond their previous mental condition. The experience of participating in advanced medical research would provide them with insights into human psychology that would make them more effective decision makers and social leaders for the remainder of their lives. Samuel, desperate to restore his daughters to their former selves and intrigued by the possibility that their suffering might contribute to scientific advancement that could help other families facing similar tragedies, found himself genuinely excited by Blackwood's proposal. The doctor's credentials were unquestionably impressive. His explanation sounded thoroughly scientific and rational, and the Vermont Medical Institute had earned an excellent reputation for innovative treatments that other institutions were too conservative to attempt. Moreover, Blackwood's explanation that the twins' identical nature made them invaluable for medical research appealed to Samuel's sense of his family's importance and social status. Their participation in this study would contribute to medical knowledge in ways that could benefit humanity for generations to come, ensuring that the Whitmore name would be associated with scientific progress rather than merely agricultural success. What Samuel didn't know, and what Blackwood had no intention of revealing, was that the doctor had already diagnosed the true nature of the twins' condition and had absolutely no interest in curing them. His real objective was discovering how far he could push human psychology in opposite directions using systematic chemical manipulation combined with behavioral conditioning. Emma and Anna represented perfect test subjects for the most ambitious experiment of his entire career. He had spent months developing a comprehensive research protocol that would transform the twins into living examples of extreme human behavioral types that could be studied, documented, and replicated in future subjects. Blackwood had identified two primary areas of investigation that the twins' conditions made possible. First, he wanted to explore the limits of human aggression and violence by systematically eliminating Emma's capacity for empathy, moral reasoning, and impulse control, while amplifying her predatory instincts and capacity for calculated cruelty. Second, he planned to investigate the boundaries of human submission and dependence by reducing Anna to a state of complete mental passivity, suggestibility, and reliance on external authority for even the most basic decision-making and self-care. The goal was not medical treatment in any conventional sense, but rather the creation of two human beings who represented perfect opposites on the spectrum of psychological possibility. One would become a completely amoral predator, capable of any violence without emotional disturbance or moral consideration. The other would become a completely submissive victim, incapable of independent thought, resistance, or self-preservation. If successful, this experiment would prove Blackwood's theories about the biological basis of personality and provide him with research data that would establish his reputation as the foremost expert on human behavioral modification in the medical world. The implications for treating mental illness, controlling criminal behavior, and understanding human nature would be revolutionary. The twins arrived at the Vermont Medical Institute on the morning of June 3, 1845, accompanied by their father and 3 family servants who helped transport their personal belongings and the various medications that Blackwood had prescribed for the journey from the farm to Burlington. The trip had required nearly 5 hours due to heavy spring rains that had transformed the roads into treacherous channels of mud and standing water. And by the time they reached the city, both Emma and Anna appeared exhausted and increasingly disoriented by their unfamiliar surroundings. The Medical Institute, housed in the impressive brick building on Church Street, had been designed to inspire confidence and awe in both patients and their families. Its massive columns and dignified architectural details suggested ancient wisdom and sacred knowledge, while the building's reputation for housing the most advanced medical research in New England promised that patients would receive treatments unavailable anywhere else in the region. Private rooms on the building's second floor had been specifically designed for long-term patient observation, with features that allowed medical staff to monitor subjects continuously without intruding on their privacy or disrupting their rest periods. Emma was assigned to room 207, a spacious chamber with large windows facing east toward Lake Champlain. Anna received room 209, identical in layout, but facing west toward the Green Mountains. Dr. Blackwood's office occupied room 208, conveniently located between his two research subjects where he could observe both of them continuously and control every aspect of their environment and daily experiences. From the moment the twins entered their respective rooms, Blackwood began implementing strict protocols designed to maintain complete separation between them while giving him total control over their environment, their interactions, and their access to information about their conditions and treatment progress. He explained to both the twins and their father that interaction between the sisters might interfere with their individual treatment programs, since their psychological conditions appeared to be influencing each other in ways that could slow or completely prevent their recovery from mental illness. Complete isolation was absolutely necessary for successful treatment, Blackwood insisted with scientific authority, and any contact between Emma and Anna during the next 5 months could potentially undo weeks of careful therapeutic progress and force them to begin the entire treatment process again from the beginning. Their meals would be prepared separately according to individualized dietary requirements that had been specifically designed to support their different treatment protocols. Their daily routines would be carefully structured to meet their specific medical needs and psychological conditions. Their access to visitors, reading material, correspondence, and even basic information about each other would be strictly controlled to prevent external influences from complicating their recovery process. Samuel Whitmore, reassured by Blackwood's professional demeanor, detailed explanations, and obvious expertise in treating complex mental conditions, agreed to these restrictions without question or hesitation. He departed from Burlington believing his daughters were in the most capable hands available anywhere in the medical world, promising to return in 5 months to take them home completely cured of their psychological disturbances. As his carriage disappeared down Church Street, heading back toward the farm and his normal business activities, Emma and Anna Whitmore began their final descent into a carefully constructed hell that had been disguised as the most advanced medical treatment available in America. Within the first 3 weeks of treatment at the Vermont Medical Institute, the differences between Emma and Anna Whitmore became so dramatically apparent that even casual observers could recognize that something unprecedented was occurring in rooms 207 and 209. The transformation was far too rapid and extreme to be explained by any conventional medical treatment or natural recovery process. Yet Dr. Blackwood's daily reports to the Institute administration consistently described steady progress toward complete recovery for both patients, with detailed documentation of their improving mental states and diminishing psychological symptoms. Emma's violent episodes, which had been manageable with proper precautions at the farm, intensified beyond anything her family had ever witnessed or imagined possible. During routine medical examinations, she would attack doctors and nurses with such sudden ferocity that leather restraints became permanent fixtures in her room, and no medical staff member was permitted to enter without at least 3 armed guards present for protection. Her physical strength, already impressive for a young woman of her size, seemed to increase dramatically each day, as if the treatments were somehow enhancing her muscular capacity, along with her aggressive impulses and violent tendencies. She could break through restraints that should have been sufficient to hold grown men, and her attacks on staff members required multiple people working together to subdue her without serious injury. Emma's speech patterns changed dramatically during this period, becoming rapid and fragmented, filled with references to violence and domination that she delivered in conversational tones That made them infinitely more disturbing than if she had been screaming or ranting incoherently. She would describe elaborate fantasies about torturing and killing other patients, members of the medical staff, and random strangers with the same casual interest that normal people might discuss their breakfast preferences or daily weather. Conditions. These descriptions included specific technical details about human anatomy, torture techniques, and methods of prolonging suffering that suggested knowledge far beyond what any 15-year-old girl should possess. Most troubling of all, Emma began claiming that she could identify weaknesses and vulnerabilities in other people simply by observing them briefly. She would stare at visitors and staff members with unblinking intensity, then announce specific methods by which they could be most efficiently killed or tortured, as if she were reading their fears and physical limitations directly from their appearance and behavior. These observations proved disturbingly accurate in ways that defied rational explanation. Emma correctly identified a nurse's deep fear of confined spaces, a visiting doctor's weak heart condition that he had kept secret from his colleagues, and a security guard's childhood injury that had left him with a permanent limp. Despite having no access to personal information about any of these individuals, she demonstrated an uncanny ability to perceive their hidden vulnerabilities and physical weaknesses. Anna's transformation moved in precisely the opposite direction, but with equal speed and alarming intensity. Within days of beginning her treatment regimen, she became completely compliant with any instruction given to her, regardless of how bizarre, degrading, or potentially harmful the request might be. When doctors asked her to perform humiliating tasks such as crawling across the floor while making animal sounds, eating meals with her hands while sitting on the ground, or standing motionless for hours while being poked and examined, she would comply immediately without any visible emotional response or resistance. Her speech patterns slowed to barely audible whispers that forced listeners to lean close to understand her words, and the content of her conversations became increasingly disconnected from external reality and current events. She would respond to simple questions about her condition or daily activities by describing elaborate scenarios involving people who had never existed, places she had never visited, and events that bore no resemblance to anything that had actually occurred. Most unsettling to the medical staff was Anna's habit of staring directly into people's eyes with an unblinking gaze that seemed to penetrate through them rather than focusing on their actual presence. Unlike her sister's predatory and calculating stare, Anna's expression remained completely vacant and empty, as if the conscious person behind her eyes had simply disappeared entirely, leaving only a biological mechanism capable of responding to external stimuli but incapable of generating independent thought or genuine emotion. Dr. Blackwood documented every detail of their deterioration with scientific precision that bordered on obsessive compulsion. His daily notes, written in an increasingly complex coded system that he had developed specifically for this research project, recorded their responses to various chemical treatments, their behavioral changes, their sleep patterns, their physical symptoms, and his own theoretical interpretations of the biological mechanisms underlying their dramatic transformations. The substances Blackwood was administering to both twins went far beyond anything recognized as legitimate medical treatment by established medical authorities. Emma received daily doses of compounds that included mercury acetate, lead-based preparations, various opium derivatives, and experimental chemicals that Blackwood had obtained through private correspondence with European researchers working in what they euphemistically termed behavioral pharmacology. The stated goal of Emma's treatment was to systematically destroy the areas of her brain responsible for empathy, moral reasoning, and impulse control while simultaneously enhancing regions associated with aggression, predatory behavior, and the capacity for calculated violence. Blackwood believed he could create a human being capable of unlimited cruelty without any psychological restraint or emotional consequence. Anna's treatment protocol involved different, but equally dangerous substances designed to produce the opposite psychological effects. Her daily medications included massive doses of morphine combined with experimental sedatives, chemical compounds that interfered with memory formation, and substances that Blackwood theorized would make her completely dependent on external authority for even the most basic decision-making processes. The objective was reducing Anna to a state of complete psychological submission, where she would become incapable of independent thought, self-preservation instincts, or resistance to any command, regardless of how harmful or degrading it might be to her physical or mental well-being. Other medical staff at the Vermont Medical Institute began expressing serious concerns about Blackwood's methods as the twins' conditions became impossible to ignore or rationalize as normal treatment procedures. Dr. Marcus Thornton, who taught anatomy and had accumulated 25 years of experience with unusual medical cases, noticed that Blackwood was using substances that were not typically employed in any recognized form of psychiatric or medical treatment. When Thornton attempted to review Blackwood's treatment protocols, research notes, and authorization documents, he was informed that the information was strictly confidential and that outside interference might seriously jeopardize the twins' recovery process and potentially cause permanent psychological damage. Nurse Helen Morrison, who had been assigned to assist with daily care of both patients, witnessed events during her shifts that left her deeply traumatized and convinced that something horrific was being systematically disguised as legitimate medical research. She began keeping her own private records of the twins' conditions, documenting changes that she believed no legitimate medical treatment could possibly produce in human subjects. According to Morrison's carefully maintained notes, Emma had begun making detailed plans for killing other patients and staff members, describing specific methods of torture and murder with enthusiasm and technical precision that suggested extensive knowledge of human anatomy and pain responses. She would explain exactly how to break bones for maximum suffering, which arteries to sever for rapid blood loss, and techniques for keeping victims conscious during extended torture sessions. These conversations were delivered in friendly, conversational tones that made them infinitely more disturbing than if Emma had been ranting incoherently or screaming threats in obvious madness. Her calm, rational discussion of extreme violence suggested a level of psychological transformation that went beyond simple mental illness into something that challenged fundamental assumptions about human nature. Anna, meanwhile, had become so passive and dependent that she would not eat food, drink water, move from one location to another, or even breathe deeply unless specifically instructed to do so by an authority figure. Nurse Morrison discovered that Anna could be positioned in any physical posture, and she would remain frozen in that exact position for hours like a living statue that had been arranged by an artist. Her responses to direct questions became increasingly delayed, as if spoken words had to travel enormous distances through her fractured mind before reaching whatever remained of her cognitive processing abilities. The time lag between question and response grew from seconds to minutes, and eventually Anna would sometimes fail to respond at all, as if the connection between external stimuli and internal awareness had been severed entirely. The most disturbing aspect of Anna's condition was her apparent complete loss of any sense of self-preservation or awareness of physical danger. When accidentally burned by a hot lamp during one medical examination, she showed absolutely no reaction to the pain, and made no attempt to move away from the heat source that was damaging her skin. When deliberately pricked with needles during various medical tests, she would observe the blood flowing from the wounds with mild curiosity, but no awareness that the injured body belonged to her, or that the pain she was experiencing required any response or attention. Dr. Thornton's concerns about Blackwood's methods reached a critical point in late August when he directly observed the physician administering substances to both twins that were clearly not medications of any recognized type. Through careful observation conducted without Blackwood's knowledge, Thornton determined that Emma was receiving regular injections of what appeared to be concentrated extracts from deadly nightshade plants, combined with mercury compounds that were known to cause severe and permanent neurological damage. Anna's treatments involved morphine in dosages that should have been immediately fatal to someone of her size and age, combined with other substances that Thornton couldn't identify, but strongly suspected were experimental poisons obtained through illegal channels. When Thornton confronted Blackwood directly about these observations, demanding to see official treatment protocols, research approval documents, and authorization from higher medical authorities, Blackwood claimed that his methods were based on advanced European research, that American physicians were too conservative and narrow-minded to understand or appreciate. The treatments might appear extreme to observers unfamiliar with cutting-edge medical science, he explained with condescending patience, but they were producing unprecedented results that would revolutionize the treatment of mental illness throughout the civilized world. American medicine would eventually recognize his contributions as groundbreaking work that had advanced human knowledge by decades. Thornton's suspicions deepened significantly when he learned that Blackwood had been maintaining extensive correspondence with physicians in Germany and Austria, who were known throughout the European medical community for conducting research that violated every accepted standard of medical ethics and human dignity. Letters that Thornton managed to intercept suggested that Blackwood was documenting his experiments in detail for publication in European journals that specialized in what they euphemistically called extreme therapeutic interventions and behavioral modification research. Just when concerns about Blackwood's methods were reaching a critical point among several faculty members and multiple staff members were preparing to formally demand a comprehensive investigation into his research practices, Anna Whitmore disappeared from her room during the night of September 15, 1845. The circumstances of her disappearance were immediately suspicious to anyone who understood Anna's actual mental condition and her complete inability to function independently. Her door was discovered unlocked the following morning, despite strict institutional policies requiring that all patient rooms be secured at all times during nighttime hours. Her bed appeared to have been slept in normally, but her personal belongings remained undisturbed, and there were no signs of struggle, forced entry, or any indication that she had packed items for departure. Most puzzling of all, Anna had somehow left the building during a period when she had been completely incapable of independent action for several weeks. Dr. Blackwood's explanation for the disappearance raised far more questions than it answered and satisfied no one who had been observing Anna's deteriorating condition. He claimed that Anna had expressed feelings of homesickness during their most recent conversation and had probably attempted to walk back to her family's farm, despite the fact that the property was located over 30 miles away through difficult terrain, and Anna had shown no capacity for independent thought or decision-making for months. Blackwood suggested that the treatments had been more successful than anyone had realized and that Anna had recovered enough mental function to plan and execute an escape from the medical facility. He proposed that she was probably wandering the countryside in a confused state, trying to find her way home to familiar surroundings. A comprehensive search of the Medical Institute building and surrounding Burlington area revealed no trace of Anna's whereabouts, though several staff members reported hearing strange sounds emanating from the basement storage areas during the nighttime hours. These included metallic scraping noises that resembled surgical instruments being prepared, muffled voices engaged in conversation, and what might have been crying or moaning sounds echoing through the ventilation systems. When these basement areas were thoroughly searched by security personnel and local authorities, investigators found nothing unusual or suspicious, though some noted that certain storage rooms showed signs of recent cleaning and reorganization that seemed inconsistent with their normally neglected and dusty condition. Emma's reaction to news of her twin sister's disappearance was immediate and more terrifying than anything she had displayed during her months of treatment and psychological Deterioration. Upon being informed that Anna was missing from the facility, Emma flew into a rage that lasted for nearly 8 continuous hours, during which she broke every piece of furniture in her room, clawed deep gouges in the wooden walls with her fingernails, until they bled, and screamed threats against everyone in the building with such specific detail that several staff members requested immediate transfers to other medical facilities. The truth about Anna's disappearance emerged 4 days later when a maintenance worker named Robert Mills made a discovery in the Institute's basement that would haunt him until his death 30 years later. Mills had been retrieving supplies from a storage room used for anatomical specimens when he detected an overwhelming odor of decay mixed with chemical preservatives. Behind a false wall that had been recently constructed, Mills found Anna's body arranged on a wooden examination table with surgical precision. Her corpse had been positioned as if she were sleeping peacefully, arms folded, eyes held open with small metal clips. Most horrifying, her skull had been carefully opened and her brain completely removed through a precise incision that demonstrated advanced surgical skill. When confronted with this discovery, Dr. Blackwood provided explanations that contradicted all medical evidence. He claimed Anna had suffered a sudden seizure and died despite immediate intervention. However, Nurse Morrison's private records proved Anna had shown no signs of seizure activity and had been in her normal catatonic state just hours before her alleged death. Most damning, Morrison had witnessed Blackwood entering Anna's room late that night, carrying surgical instruments and wearing the specialized gloves he used only during the experimental procedures. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Emma Whitmore died on September 22nd, exactly 1 week after her sister's body was discovered. The official cause was listed as acute mental exhaustion, but attending physicians noted symptoms consistent with severe chemical poisoning rather than natural psychological breakdown. Her final words, spoken with perfect clarity despite physical distress, were a plea to tell the world what the doctor had transformed them into. Dr. Blackwood vanished from Burlington 72 hours after Emma's death, leaving only a resignation letter claiming family emergency. When authorities attempted to verify his credentials, they discovered that his supposed Harvard education was fabricated. The Philadelphia hospital had no record of his employment, and the family emergency was entirely fictitious. The Vermont Medical Institute faced an impossible choice. They could expose Blackwood's crimes and seek justice, potentially destroying public trust in medical institutions, or bury the evidence to protect their reputation. They chose silence. All documentation was sealed, staff members signed confidentiality agreements, and the basement room was permanently closed. Samuel Whitmore received a sanitized explanation portraying his daughters as victims of rare hereditary illness. He never learned the truth about their systematic torture and murder disguised as medical treatment. The twins were buried in the family cemetery with headstones reading, "Beloved daughters taken by God's will." Today, the building still operates as part of the University of Vermont Medical Campus. The basement room remains sealed after nearly 180 years. Security guards report strange sounds at night, and medical students claim to see 2 identical figures in 19th century clothing, walking the hallways after dark. The Whitmore farm continues to exist under different ownership, and the twins' graves have been reclaimed by wild vegetation. Local historians who attempt to research the family consistently encounter missing records and destroyed documents, suggesting someone still works to keep this story buried. Dr. Sarah Mitchell of the Vermont Historical Society spent 12 years trying to piece together the complete story before abandoning her research in 2019. Her final report concluded that the systematic evidence removal indicates institutional involvement continuing across generations, implying that whatever happened to Emma and Anna Whitmore was significant enough that powerful interests still consider it worth concealing. The boundary between historical fact and institutional cover-up remains deliberately blurred, especially when medical establishments have compelling reasons to keep certain truths buried forever. The Whitmore twins may be gone, but their story serves as a chilling reminder that the price of scientific progress has sometimes been paid by those who never consented to become part of history's darkest experiments. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.